Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning, good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And I don't know what the heck's going on. I keep interviewing these elite athletes, and I love talking with elite athletes, especially because they have a different perspective about business based on being that athlete and knowing what it takes to plan and be successful and all sorts of things. And so I love my guest today. So please join me in welcoming Bryan Gillette to our program today. Bryan, how the heck are you?
Deb, it is nice to be on your show. You said elite athlete. I'm not sure I'd call myself an elite athlete, but I'm an endurance athlete. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are faster, and I tend to be at kind of the top third of the pack on things. But
I'm the lazy one, so anybody to me is an elite athlete.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. It's great to be on, Deb.
Right. Well, let me tell people a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Bryan Gillette is a former executive, an ultradistance athlete, which makes me tired just thinking about it, and the president and founder of Summiting Group, a consulting firm that helps leaders and teams reach their peak performance. For more than 25 years, Bryan has held senior roles in companies at all sizes, leading teams of hundreds of people and managing multi-million-dollar budgets. Through Summiting Group, he has taught or consulted with leaders all over the world and facilitated executive strategic planning retreats for startups and Fortune 100 organizations. As a lifelong endurance athlete, Bryan has cycled across the U.S., completed a 300-mile ride in one day, holy cow, and finished many 50 and 100-mile ultra-distance runs. At age 47, he ran, get this, 205 miles around Lake Tahoe. That's 8 back-to-back marathons. Now he is the author of the new book, Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. Okay, now I'm tired. So again, Bryan, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Deb. Yeah, you did a nice job on that summary, and we'll expand on a bunch of those things. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, and it's always such fun to be speaking with my guests. And one of the things that I ask them is, tell us how you got to where you are today and how you discovered that this is your passion in life.
Yeah, Deb, I've always been goal oriented, and it's like, okay, what is it? What is it that I'm looking for? Where do I want to go? Kind of very deliberate on things. My dad retired when he was 50, and then he and my mom went and they traveled around the world. They traveled around the United States a lot, and I saw that, and I was just coming out of college at that point. And also he had his own business. He was in construction. And so his office was downstairs in the house, and I could anytime go down and just hang with him. And I thought that was so cool. Great. Plus, I always had a summer job because I could go work out, work for him during the summers. And I thought, it's so cool that I can go down and just in the middle of the day and go to my dad's office and talk to him and just kind of catch up. And it was never a problem. And so I thought, I want to be able to provide that type of environment when my kids get a little bit older. And then the other thing is, as I was in college, I was dating this one woman, and I was talking to her mom, and her mom just hated her job. She hated the people, she hated the work, and she was in her mid-50s, I think, at the time.
So she had a ways to go.
She had a ways to go. She hadn't been very good at saving, and so she wasn't going to be retiring anytime soon. Plus, she was into her career, where it's hard to change careers at that point. And I saw how she hated what she did, and I thought, I never want to be in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
I never want to be in the situation where I just don't like what I'm doing. Now, granted, there's always that
Right.
that time where it's like, yeah, I don't enjoy my boss,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, but if it lasts years and years,
Mm-hmm.
you got to do something about it. And so I always thought, so life is short,
Mm-hmm.
and how do I make sure that I can have that experience for my kids that I had with my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted to run my own business,
Mm-hmm.
but I also liked the corporate world.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured, all right, when I'm in that 50
Mm-hmm.
range, and I just passed it a couple years ago, I want the ability to start my own business.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are all the things I need to do in order to get the skills, in order to
Yeah.
get some of the, I tend to be very conservative financially.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do I make sure that, I've got that,
Right.
protected? And I
Mm-hmm.
went to work for a financial services company.
Mm-hmm.
So I got that investing
Right.
experience.
You knew that nest egg is not to be touched.
Right. Yes. And it's interesting because and we can share some stories later on that I talked to a couple executives who, looked at some things like that
Mm-hmm.
as well. So I visualized what I wanted the future to look
Mm-hmm.
like. And then I went about and just, kind of when I made decisions with a
Mm-hmm.
job move, I would look at that. How does this impact the longer term goal?
Mm-hmm.
So just very focused on what I wanted, very deliberate and very kind of driven in
Mm-hmm.
order to get that. And the consulting practice I have now, it allows me a lifestyle where I can still go to my kids' school. I have one in high school and one I'm getting ready to go into high school next
Mm-hmm.
year.
So you got a lot of events and things you could be going to.
I do. And now I am becoming less important to them because
Right.
they're
Yeah.
venturing out to their friends,
Mm-hmm.
but at least when they were going through the younger
Mm-hmm.
ages, I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will make a difference. I mean, I have a really good relationship with both my parents and my dad, and I'm hopeful that will happen with my kids as well. So
I love it.
I just kind of that's kind of how I got to where I'm at today. And there are a lot of other parts that
Mhm.
are missing, but
Right. And I love, like I said, I love talking with athletes about business because they really do have a different perspective. And you said one of the key words, goal.
yeah.
An athlete, whether you're a team player or an individual sport, you are wanting to achieve something.
Right.
Whether it's just to cross the finish line, whether it's to win the Super Bowl, I mean, whatever it is, you're not just going, okay, let's go do this today. I mean,
Right.
and even short term, it could be, I want to do 10 miles today. I want to swim, whatever. And for, couch potatoes like me, I did a cancer fundraiser back in June in August in Atlanta. So this was very fun, where we were to walk a mile a day. That was actually really challenging in the
Probably
sun.
it was bloody hot or humid there, huh?
I know. But to get into that mile was really important. I mean, it became that focus of I was going to do it. I was going to do it. And oh gosh, I couldn't do it today. So that means 2 miles tomorrow. And so we have to have those goals as an athlete. And so many times when we're in business, we don't have goals. So talk to us about why it is so important as a business leader, as a business owner, that we've got goals.
You got to know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, and I do a lot of work with teams, and I help them figure out, okay, where are you going to be going over the next couple of years? Yeah, I mean, you think about a pilot, when they get into the airplane, they have their flight plan. And they know they're flying from San Francisco to New York. They don't just know they're leaving San Francisco and they're going to get up and fly.
Right.
And then kind of wherever
you got to point that plane somewhere.
Right. You got to point that. I mean, there are some people that I talk to and they say, I just kind of go wherever. And it's a more freeing lifestyle. And if that works for them, then that's great. I believe that I have a lot more control over my destiny. Of where I want to get to, and especially when you're thinking, long term. It's like, what can I do this year? So it's the same thing with business. And as I talked, for my book, I interviewed 100 executives and endurance athletes. Most of those were in the executive side, and we talked a lot about kind of setting goals, and a lot of them were really good at thinking not 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, but 10 years or 15 or 20 years, because things take 10 years or 15 or 20 years. And so it gives you a framework of where you're going. And then it allows you to break those goals down into smaller steps.
Right.
You know, if we use the marathon example, you know, I remember I had just finished the 300-mile bike ride that you talked about, 24 hours on a bike. And I'd always been a cyclist. I hadn't been a runner. And as I was coming up to kind of the last 25 miles of the bike ride, I thought, you know, I've got this. Now what's next?
Right.
Because I always like to think about what's next. And I thought, you know, I've never been a runner. You know, I when I did run for soccer, I played soccer as a kid. I was often the slowest, and I want to run a marathon. It's kind of the ultimate running event.
Right.
So I set the goal, run a marathon, and it gives me something to work toward. And the first day of training, I go out and I run 4 miles, thinking I'm in really good shape. I just rode 300 miles.
Right.
And you know, my legs are great.
I can do this.
I can do this, no problem. And I knew I could do it. And I run the 4 miles. I do it at lunchtime. I come back and I'm on a call like this. And then I have to go upstairs to go to the bathroom. I walk upstairs and my legs are really tight.
Your hamstrings went, hey, dude.
My whole body, Deb. Everything kind of, you know, below my waist. It's like, oh, that hurt. And it was where some people would say, oh, man, I'm not going to be able to run marathons. I just look at it, and this is how so many of the people I talk to look at it. It's like, okay, I may not be able to run the marathon today.
Right.
But today I ran 4 miles. Next week I have to run 5 miles. And then 6 miles. And then eventually, and it's the same. So many people say I couldn't run a marathon.
Right.
And you know, it's only 1% of the populations run a marathon. And I think you could flip that and say probably only 1% couldn't run a marathon.
Right.
So,
and those that can't can do something else. That's the other thing.
Well, there's that point, yes. And the thing I often look at is don't let, oh, I can't do it. I'm too old. I'm too fat. I'm, don't have enough money. Don't let that be the reason.
Right.
Let it be, I just have no desire to run a marathon. And I get that.
Yeah. I mean, if you just say, I don't want to do that, like me, no.
Great.
Yeah.
But what is it that it's fine? What is it that you want to do that you're passionate about and figure out, okay, how can I do that?
Right. You know, and from a business perspective, it's funny. I'm a marketing person by trade. And so we often talk about having BHAGs.
Yes.
Big, hairy, audacious goals. And those are great to have, but I think sometimes we make them so big, so hairy, so audacious that we can't meet them, you know, and that's the problem when we, you know, and so then we get partway there and we just give up. I mean, you know, and so, I mean, that would be like me saying I'm going to run a marathon. That is not going to happen for a variety of reasons. But if I started and then had to stop, it's like, well, then why should I even bother? I'm just, you know, and I think that's so when we're talking about goals, they need to be reasonable goals, but you also talk about the fact that you need to push them. You know, it can't just be, I'm going to run 3 miles today. I think I can do 4.
Yeah.
You know, and so that I think is the key when you're making goals.
I think it is. And I use kind of this nervous quote, or I talk about this nervous quotient and why I think it's good to be nervous going into a big goal. Because how do you know, I would challenge you that you couldn't run a marathon.
I could if I wanted to. I just don't want to.
Right. And I applaud you for that. What makes me nervous and how this came to be is because, you know, I ran the 200 miles. It's hard, hardest physical and one of the harder physical and mental things I've done. And, you know, a number of people said I could never do that. But what also happened is my wife and I took our 2 kids out of school for a year, about 5 years ago, and we traveled around the world.
Oh my gosh, how wonderful.
It was a great experience. But right before we left, we had some friends that threw a going away party. And I had a number of people that came up to me and said, you know, I could never do what you're doing. And it kind of tore at me a little bit because it's not that you couldn't do it. Because you could.
Right.
I'm not that special.
Why are you putting those limitations there?
Right. And that's what it's like. We put these limitations in our head. If you don't want to do it,
Mhm.
I get that and I
Mhm.
support that. Just find something
Mhm.
else. So part of, go back to that nervous quotient that I
Mhm.
was talking about. It gives you a perspective of if you are thinking big enough.
Mhm.
Um, because maybe you set that BHAG
Mhm.
and you don't hit it the first time.
Mhm.
Maybe you just need a little bit more time, or maybe you
Right.
need. And
Mhm.
so how do you do that?
Mhm.
And I was working with a group a couple of months ago, and we were putting together what their goals were for the next couple of
Mhm.
years. And we had something on the flip chart, and I turn around, I look at the flip chart, and I turn back and look at the team, and I said, "Do these goals make you nervous?"
Mm.
And a couple of them said, "No,
Eh.
I feel we can do it."
Mhm.
And my response was, "I think you can probably go a little bit further then."
Right.
Because you can probably go a little bit further
Mhm.
and accomplish it. But wouldn't it be great if this is where your goal was,
Mhm.
and maybe if you shot for a little bit
Mhm.
higher and yet landed somewhere in between, you're still further than where
Right.
your
Mhm.
original goal was.
Mhm.
And so it's that nervous quotient when
Mhm.
you look at something. I will tell you, every time I've stood at a starting line,
Mhm.
I've had kind of,
Mhm. The
butterflies
butterflies. Mhm.
flying around my belly, like, okay, what am I getting into now?
Mhm. Right.
And so I think it's a great thing
Mhm.
to keep in mind. It's like, are
Right.
you nervous?
Yeah. Well, and nerves, adrenaline, whatever, that is what kind of gets us through. I remember, a while ago hearing Barbara Streisand talk about the fact that she almost gets so nervous that she's to the point of throwing up. I mean,
Right,
because she's always thinking, "Oh my God, what if I fail?"
right,
But then there's that saying, "But what if you succeed?"
right. And
You know,
is
and
there a better sing? I mean, there are
mhm,
few female singers
mhm.
that can
Right.
sing
And to
as
think,
well
"Oh
as.
my gosh, she gets that nervous?"
Yeah, and it
Mhm,
stopped her
mhm.
from performing for
Right.
many years.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's good to hear from people like her, John Madden, and
Mhm.
who a football
Right.
coach for the Oakland Raiders.
Mhm.
He lived about 2 miles from where I am,
Mhm.
and passed away last year.
Mhm.
He hated to fly.
Right. Oh, yeah. Took buses everywhere.
Took
Mhm.
buses everywhere, and so every once in a while he called it the Madden Cruiser. We would see
Mhm.
the Madden Cruiser, and he just
Mhm.
that fear can stop people,
Right. Mhm. But he found a
or
way around it.
he found it a way
Mhm.
around it. Yeah, how do you manage that?
Mhm. Right. And eh, the fear, I mean, it's fear is how we survive. Fear is what tells us, hey, there's a bear, right?
Right.
Or, okay, maybe this is maybe and so what it's telling us is, have we thought it through? Have we planned? All of those various things. And of course, having all of that, we all know when somebody has the opposite, when they, when somebody gets on stage and they're like, yeah, I've done this 200 times. Don't
Right.
care.
Right.
The athlete that goes out and, you know,
Phones it
okay.
in.
Yeah, and you still might think, wow, they're great. This was wonderful, but you still come away from it going, huh. And so the second that we as business people think this is easy, maybe that's the time where it's like, okay, now what? What do we
Yeah.
need to be doing next?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you talk about fear, because fear and excitement physiologically are the same on the body.
Right.
I
Hmm.
mean, if you're afraid or if you're excited, you
Hmm.
still have those butterflies in
Hmm.
the belly. You still have kind of sweaty
Hmm.
palms, and you're nervous.
Hmm.
And this hit really home. So when we were traveling a couple of years ago, when we were traveling around the world,
Hmm.
we spent 4 months in Africa.
Hmm.
And we were out on safari one day in an open Jeep.
Hmm.
And so it was just me, my wife, my two sons,
Hmm.
and our guide.
Hmm.
And we drive up, and about 20 yards or so, we see a lion,
Hmm.
and just laying down on the grass. We stop, and that lion gets up and starts walking toward us.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. It wasn't uh-oh that we said.
Oh, darn.
Yeah. Oh, poop. And it's walking, and the Jeep we're in is open. We're probably
and this
about
is not one of those times where it's I just have to be faster than you since it's your family.
right. Yeah, I knew I could outrun my kids and my wife. So, but that was a little bit worrisome. And my son and my wife were on the side of the Jeep where the lion was coming, and my wife turns to our guide and quiet and says, "Is this okay?
Should we be moving?
Should we be getting out of here?" And I will tell you, those butterflies were flying like crazy in my belly, and I was nervous, and she was nervous. I don't think the kids knew they should be nervous, which that's the wonderful thing about kids. And the guide said, "Everything's fine. Just kind of stay quiet and don't move much." The lion came down, walked literally within a foot of our Jeep, and just sat down in the shade of the Jeep. And I will tell you that fear moved from fear to excitement. And
isn't this just the coolest thing we could have ever seen?
It was. I mean, we were looking at each other going, "Oh my God, this is so great." And what fear does, and you talked about it, fear is what keeps our species alive. Because when we see, you said the bear, when we see the lion, we leave. But what it also does is it stops us from doing things that may be relatively safe. So, and I loved how you were talking about how, sometimes we get to that point where it's like, oh, okay, I'm kind of bored a little bit. And I liken it to like swimming in the deep end or the shallow end of the pool. Swimming in the deep end or the shallow end, it's the same water.
Right.
It's the same. And if you find yourself swimming in we swim in the shallow end of the pool because we build confidence and we learn. But then it's scary to swim in the deep end of the pool because we don't know. But eventually
you can't touch.
You can't touch. But it's no different from swimming. If you can swim in the shallow end of the pool without touching, you can do it in the deep end. And so it's like, I often ask teams, it's like, are you spending a lot of your time in the shallow end of the pool? And do you need to go spend some time in the deep end of the pool? At least for part of your time.
Right. And, it's all about being prepared. If it's like, well, I swim down there, but I have to touch a lot. Right. Okay, then you need more training, and things, you might need your little water wings, right? And so it's the same thing in business. I mean, you're not just going to leap off that diving board and hope that things will be okay, because that may or may not happen. But at some point you do need to leap. I was just thinking, I started my business over 20 years ago, and I did it as a side gig. And this was before they called them side gigs. But, and I had met with a business consultant, and she was, I was talking to her about everything. And she finally told me, she said, "You need to quit your job." And I went, "Oh, no. And she said, "I had jumped off the diving board and then was hanging on to it." Right. And she said, another metaphor in here, fish or cut bait. Right. And it's that thing, she said, "You have everything done. Now you just need to let go and trust that you have everything taken care of." And I think that's the other thing, is sometimes we're like, yeah, but.
Yeah. Or figure out what was holding you back from quitting the job. Right. Okay, maybe it was because I've got this stable income. Right.
Insurance, all of those various things.
Yeah. And so how can you break those down into those fears down into smaller components? I mean, it's the same thing with goals. You think about a big goal. It's like, I want to run a marathon. I'm not going to start off with a marathon. I'm going to start off with a 5K. Right. And then with goals, you break them down, but same thing with fear. It's like, what is it that you're afraid of? Okay, it's that financial security. It's people not hiring me, whatever it is. And so if you look at that financial security, what is it you can put in place that would make you feel comfortable? And I talked to a couple of entrepreneurs, and they were getting ready to start their own business. And I said, well, how'd you manage that? And, what were some of your fears and how'd you handle that? And one of them was the financial security.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And a couple of them said is they said, we paid off our mortgage, or we significantly paid it down.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because I didn't want to get to a point where I'd lose the house or get into that stressful.
Mm-hmm.
So they took it, what one of their big fears was, broke it down a bit.
Right. And it is all about planning, which is actually part of an acronym for you. And I mentioned your book, Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And EPIC is an acronym. So, what is it an acronym for?
Yeah. So epic performance, there's the 5 behaviors of epic performance, and the E stands for how do you envision the big things in life, at work, in your career that you want to accomplish. And then the P is how do you put a plan in place in order to reach those.
Okay.
The I is how do you iterate to that plan. So, what iterate means is you don't start off, running a Fortune 500 company. You start off, having one product, and you work your way up and you build it. You don't start off running a marathon, you start off running a 5K. And so that iterate, and all along the iteration, you're building confidence. And that allows you to get bigger. The C is how do you collaborate with somebody else? Somebody's done what you're looking for.
I know. We like to think that we're special and that we're unique, but not so much.
I mean, so many of my clients will say, we're so unique in this industry, or we're so unique in our company. And I get in for the stuff I'm dealing with, kind of leadership or strategic planning. You're not that unique. I'm sorry. Hopefully they're not listening. But the issues are the same. I'm teaching a leadership program right now for a high tech company, and I will tell you, you could take that program and teach it for a nonprofit, non-technology company. The issues are the same. So that's collaborate, learn from somebody else. We haven't put a man on Mars yet.
Right.
But we have put one on the moon. We have sent something to Mars. So how do you learn from those elements, even though if it's not the same?
Right.
What are the people that have gone before you? What have they done well, and where have they failed?
Yeah, and collaborating is, I think it is so important. Whether it's a mentor, a business partner, a whoever. Yeah, somebody has been through what you're going through, and so why not learn from them?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we most of us have never been through a pandemic, but we've been through things that we could learn from it. So that's the C. And then the last one is perform. How do you go out, and eventually you have to start at the start line and work towards the finish line, and you have to persevere through the difficult times. I wrote, there's one of the chapters is on perseverance, and when you run 200 miles over the course of 76 hours, there are days, there are times that you don't want to be there.
Oh yeah, you want to be anywhere other than
right. And what keeps you going? And I will tell you, the same thing that keeps an endurance athlete going to the finish line are some of the same behaviors that keeps an executive or an entrepreneur that started up their business to keep going.
Right. And it's funny, you've got you talk about this in the book, and then you've got a blog post about this. Dead last finish is greater than did not finish, which is better than didn't start.
Right. And that I was, my wife is a swimmer, and her swim team, she swims in for a master's group, and her swim club was holding an endurance an endurance swim. So it was a 5K swim, and I was out on my paddleboard following the last swimmer, just from a safety perspective, and we were going really slow, and there was a point where it's like, I don't know if we're going to make the cutoff, but he started and he kept going. And yes, he was last, but of the 200 people, he was the last person to get out of the water. But of all the other billion people that never even started.
Right.
And that's like, he was my hero for the day. And so there are things I've done, and it's like I failed. It's like, okay, at least I tried.
Right.
So
And it is about reframing that because, I remember, especially during the Olympics, you always hear that, the silver medalist. Ugh.
Yeah.
Bronze is okay. I always found that very interesting. But a lot of times they say, silver was the first loser.
Yeah, my dad used to say that.
Really?
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, look at how many people never get anywhere near that. And to get a silver medal in the Olympics,
Yeah.
holy cow. And I mean, it's incredible. I actually have a relative who is an Olympian of the highest order. I mean, she has gold medal several times.
Whew.
She's a pole vaulter of all
Oh.
things. And she's not related. We're not related by blood. We're out what we would call in our family outlaws. But she's Greek and she is a pole vaulter. And it was so funny because I had no idea this person existed. And we're watching the Olympics, Summer Olympics several years ago. And of course, Greece always leads in, right? Because
Yes.
the Olympics
Yeah.
were, and they're like, and here's Katerina Krier. And I went, huh, that's my name. And so, what do? You get on Facebook, you Google, and it was like, holy shimoly. She is married to my husband's cousin's son. I mean, that's why we're, but she is, and so now we're Facebook friends and all sorts of things. And, it is just incredible when she talks about, this last Olympics, she didn't get gold medals. She still knows how good she is. And she said, she realized she's about to age out. I mean, with many sports, it truly is a young person's game.
Yeah.
And especially something like that. I mean, it's, I guess they have senior Olympics and they might have pole vaulting. That kind of worries me that, you'd have a senior pole vaulter. They might hurt something. But she said, now it's just time to move on to the next adventure.
Yeah. She's got a really good attitude because, I have read a number of things about people who peak really early.
Right.
You look at those athletes and they reach, at 22, they've hit the pinnacle.
Right.
And then
what?
And it's like when the guys landed the man on the moon, who was the second person? Neil Armstrong and
right. And I know, right? We don't remember him. Was it Buzz? Was it
Buzz Aldrin?
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure. And so I was listening to his autobiography. I'd go out and I would do long runs, and so I'd listen to autobiography. And he had a big problem with alcoholism because he landed on the moon.
Second.
Really well, not second, but because that wasn't the problem. But he reached. When you're an astronaut, is there anything bigger than landing on the moon?
Right.
So early on, he just reached this pinnacle, and it's like, okay, now what?
Right.
And that was really hard for him. So it wasn't the second part, but it was the fact that he reached this pinnacle, and there's not a lot of places to go beyond the moon.
Right. Yeah.
Especially.
And so you need to pivot.
Yeah. And so he had a hard time. And you see that with young actors. I mean, how many I watched a lot of shows in the 70s. And so there were a lot of childhood actors, and you can count probably on one hand.
What happened to them?
Yeah. They turned to drugs, they turned to jail. It was bad. So I love kind of your relative's perspective. It's a very healthy perspective to have.
Yeah. Like I said, I've interviewed several athletes. I interviewed in September a former professional NBA professional player. And I said, so when did you know that was what you wanted to do? He was 4. And I'm like, somebody would throw you the ball and you'd knock you over. But and he said, yeah, it was a challenge. And I have a young man that I'm working with who is a college football player who just graduated, and he's like, now what? And I love this young man's perspective because he is still hoping to play pro football. He is elite enough that he just hasn't made the first, and he realizes he might need to play in Europe or things like that, and he's cool with that. But he contacted me through LinkedIn. Now, I knew that he was going to contact me. The athletic department for the school, we're both an alumni, and I work with the athletic department, and they had contacted me and said, hey, would it be okay if he contacted you? And I said, sure, here's my cell, here's my email. And he contacted me through LinkedIn. And I looked at his profile and was like, okay, this is somebody who's 23. I mean,
Right.
it didn't matter. But at the same point, I was so incredibly impressed with the fact that he thought, that he was on LinkedIn. And when I actually talked to him, I said, so, what do you want to be when you grow up? He said, well, I'm not quite sure. He said, because I've always been this athlete. And he said, but I know that right now I have to be building my network. So what do I need to do? And, I think that's, whether we're an employee, whether a business owner, whatever, it comes back to what we were saying. We're resting on those laurels and we're never stopping to think, what if? I think that's a big reason why so many businesses in, the last 2.5 years went kablooey. They were going along, they were doing very well in many cases, and COVID hit and they had absolutely no idea what to do.
Yeah.
They couldn't pivot. They couldn't see, and it didn't help that they told us 2 weeks, right? They told us 2 weeks and we all laughed, right?
It's only going to be 2 weeks.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, right. In what universe?
But I mean, I will tell you, I remember having the same thought. Okay. Yeah. We're going to be, my kids
I was thinking 3 months.
Okay. So there you go. Yeah. You were probably thinking a little bit further ahead than I was, but it's like, yeah, we're going to be back to school, So.
Yeah. Well, and you would have had kids that came home.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things. And I think that, we've got to have that in there. And again, coming back to athletes, we see them make those changes, where it's like, okay, well, this didn't work. So now we've got to go here. A big thing, whatever your road might be blocked. If you're doing something that you do, if you're a team sport person, it's like, okay, can't pass to A. So now we're going to pass to B. And so it is all about having to figure out, if I can't do this, then what? But you have to have had that foundation built.
Yeah. And I like the example you use from the guy that you're mentoring is, this is what Collaborate is about, is he needed to talk to somebody who was more of an expert in the field than he was. And so he reached out to you and he's building up his network. So,
and I was just impressed that a 23-year-old could hold a conversation with me. and it was an intelligent conversation. I mean, this young man, I've already introduced him to several people because he was so incredibly impressive. And I mean, there are 50-year-olds that I look at and go,
it's funny that you say that, because I was on a podcast yesterday. And it was an 8th grader. It's a friend of my son's, and he's an 8th grader, and he just wanted something to do. And so he started this podcast.
I love it.
Yeah. And he, I think I'm the 4th guest. He interviewed his dad. He interviewed, and he reached out to me, sent me it wasn't his parents. He sent me an email and said, and I mean, very well written, nice email, and said, would you be on it? And I know he was scared to death.
Right.
And it's like, he doesn't have a social following. He doesn't have a lot of listeners, but it's like, how can I say no?
Right.
To this. And so I was on his podcast yesterday. And we finished up, and I called his mom right after. I said, you should be so proud of your son. For that 8th grader holding a conversation with an adult and asking some good questions. And I told him, I said, I've been on a lot of podcasts lately, and I said, you were one of the more well-prepared ones.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So I mean, there's some really good younger folks out there, which gives me some hope.
I know. And again, they're planning, they're thinking about, what do I want to be? Now, I think what do I want to be when I grow up? Right.
Yeah.
But that, of course, that presupposes that I'm going to grow up.
Well, that did cross my mind.
Yeah. You were just too polite to say. But yeah, it is, if we are, I apologize for that.
No worries.
And they, it is something where we have to think ahead. And even like, when you're getting ready to retire, what are you going to do? Are you going to go into a second career, which I think a lot of people are doing now? Clearly many people made those decisions during COVID. I'm not
Yeah.
going back into that office. Nope, nope.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and all sorts of things. And it's, I love seeing when people are like, I'm going to take those risks. And you talk about that, about why it's important to take risks. And of course, we
Mhm.
like safe, we like secure, but talk to us more about why it is that we need to embrace risks.
Well, and this was one of the things I was surprised when I had conversations
Mhm.
with all these people, and I would ask, so what's your comfort level with risk? And I'm talking with venture capitalists, I'm talking to CEOs,
Mhm.
CXOs. I talked to two people who did 7 marathons in 7 days on 7
Oh,
continents.
holy cow.
Yeah, holy cow. I know. They just some very impressive stories.
Mhm.
And people that took a lot of risk with money.
Mhm.
And what surprised me, what I heard a number of times is we really look at kind of manage that risk. So
Mhm.
it's not like we're jumping into the pool without
Mhm.
looking.
Right.
We look at the
Mhm.
pool and we take a
Mhm.
measured approach to
Mhm.
it. If you saw the movie Free Solo,
Mm.
it's a great movie, just to kind of thinking about risk. It is about a guy who free solo is when you climb a rock without a rope.
Okay.
So you
So if
mount,
you fall, whoopsie.
you're dead. Yeah, I mean, and so he
Mhm.
climbed El Capitan,
Oh my. Mhm.
which is I think it's one of the
Mhm.
biggest pieces of granite,
Right. Mhm.
and it is, and I don't know that the top of or the height of it, but
Mhm.
it's one of the more
Mhm.
difficult climbs.
Right.
Most people do it with a rope.
Mhm.
He did it without a rope. And so if you fall, you are dead. It's
Right.
that
Mhm.
simple.
Right.
But what he does beforehand is he practices
Mhm.
every single
Right.
route, and he
Mhm.
knows exactly how
Mhm.
he's climbing and how he's going to get from A to
Mhm.
B. And he did it with a rope, so he would fall, and
Mhm.
he didn't go
Right.
back until
Yeah,
he
he
had that
didn't just
confidence.
do that. Mhm.
Right. So people would say he's taken an
Mhm.
exorbitant amount of risk.
Mhm.
The downside of failure is very high.
Right. Mhm.
But so many of the business folks that I talk to say we really kind of look at what's that downside risk.
Mhm.
How do we break that down?
Mhm.
I talked to one executive, vice president in a large marketing company,
Mhm.
and he also invests in real estate.
Mhm.
And so at one point I think it was like 98% leveraged, or it
Ooh.
was above 90% leverage.
Wow.
A lot of debt.
Mhm.
And he had borrowed money from his parents' retirement.
Yikes.
A lot of risk. And so what he
Mhm.
looked at is he goes, I really saw there were 3 buckets.
Mhm.
There was if I lose my job, if I lose a tenant,
Mhm.
or if I have to do a major remodel or put
Mhm.
a lot of cash out.
Right.
Those were my 3
Mhm.
big things that could impact this.
Mhm.
And then I looked at each one of those and I broke that risk
Mhm.
down further. How do I minimize it from happening?
Mhm.
How do I minimize this from happening?
Mhm.
And so I thought I was gonna, when I talked to these 100 people, it's like, oh yeah, we love risk. It's like
Mhm.
most of them, no, they don't
Mhm.
want risk.
Right.
They want to reduce it as much as
Mhm.
possible. And so that's
Mhm.
what they did.
Right. Well, and it is kind of like, being a successful gambler. You do not risk more than you can afford to lose.
Right. A- and
Mhm.
interesting because one of the CEOs I talked about, out of college, he went in and was playing blackjack. So he was making money as
Mhm.
in gambling,
Mhm.
and he was doing fairly
Mhm.
well. But you look at that is what the odds are
Right. Mhm.
of something.
Mhm.
So it's not like you're just throwing money
Mhm.
away. You're saying, okay, the odds are 1 in X.
Mhm.
And am I comfortable with that?
Right. Mhm.
I know what the risk
Mhm.
is. I know what the payback
Mhm.
is, and I know what the downside risk
Right.
is.
Mhm.
So even in that
Mhm.
situation, a professional gambler,
Mhm.
not the person that just goes up on the weekend, but a
Right.
professional gambler
Mhm.
is making very informed decisions of why they're betting, why they're doubling down.
Right. Right. And, if they're in a tournament, which, poker, blackjack, whatever, they have also researched their competition.
Right.
They know, okay, this person, obviously they're looking for tells. We all, we everybody who knows poker knows things, you're looking for tells. but they're also going, okay, are they more or less risk adverse?
Right.
If they've, say, blackjack, if they've got 18, what are they going to do? And so they study all of that. And I think that's important as business people. And I have so many people who say, I don't pay attention to my competition. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Why the heck not? You want to learn, first of all, if they are successful, what are they doing that
Right.
makes them successful? And back to being an athlete, what do I need to do to beat them?
Right.
We also, so why not? No, and again, we ain't unique. Everybody has competition. So how is it, what are they doing? And more importantly, okay, if you're looking at them and thinking they could be doing more and they're not, why?
Right.
Because we see people like that too. It's like, okay, they've opened 4 stores. Why haven't they opened 10? Wonder why.
Yeah.
And
they may have a very sound reason why.
right. They might be very risk adverse. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, or I don't see the population yet.
Right.
And so there may be some good reasons, and it goes back to, it's like, are you making informed decisions? And so I love what you talk about, Deb. Yeah.
Right. And failures are the other thing. Everybody fails. And I mean, of course, the biggest failure is to not try at all.
Mm-hmm.
But we all fail, and so what we have to do, unless we've been the free climber and gone splat, we survive, and then we need to look at it and go, okay, how do if it's and you might just say, okay, not doing that again. You might really, but if you're going forward with it, then you look at it and go, okay, did I not plan well enough? Did I not finance it well enough? Did I not have the right knowledge? I mean, all of those various things, because then you've got a better chance to be successful.
And what you're talking about is, let's learn from those failures, whether they're your own or somebody else. That's what I talk about with Collaborate. It's like somebody probably has failed at doing this. And realize, what is it about the failure that we're afraid of? We often think of the worst case scenario.
Right. Oh, people aren't going to like me anymore.
Well, and if you go further, it's like, I'm going to die.
Right.
My company's going to go out of business.
Right.
But it's like, okay, maybe people, you're going to put this podcast out and maybe people won't listen. And it's like,
I might feel bad, but the world still goes, right?
Right. And so what is it you're afraid of? And is it that bad?
Right.
I mean, can you get over? But we worry about that downside risk. One of the CEOs, actually a founder of a company, he wasn't the CEO. He founded the company, and he was smart enough to give it to a professional CEO. Sold the company for a couple $2 billion. He now skis all over the world. He's a phenomenal skier, and he's got his own ski coach. And so he said, when I'm standing on a cornice, and I'm looking down, and I will tell you, my heart rate is going, then I think about, all right, sometimes there's that component of, I think about, okay, what's the worst case scenario? But I think about what's the realistic worst case scenario, because there's a series of things that often have to go wrong before the worst case scenario happens. And then it's like, how do you allow for some failure? One of the guys, founder of a couple companies, he was on the board of a company I was working for, and he's a really good golfer. And he goes, when I get ready to play a golf match, I give myself 2 bogeys. I give myself permission to
You
fail.
can screw up twice.
Right. 2 times you can screw up. And he goes, if those happen to come on the first 2 holes, I just say, those were my 2 bogeys, and I move on.
Right.
So how do you give yourself permission? Perfect is the enemy of the good sometimes. And how do you give yourself that permission at times to fail?
Right. And if you have those 2 bogeys right at the start, then you're not thinking, now what? Now, am I going to bogey again?
Right.
But even if you do, it's like, okay, so maybe I'm just having an off day today. But it's about taking those situations. We obviously saw it a lot during COVID. And I was watching a show on the History Channel yesterday, and it's food wars or something like this, but it's historical things. And so this was the Lay's potato chip guy versus the Fritos potato chip guy. And clearly they all did, very well. But the Fritos guy, this was back in the 1940s.
Okay.
And so he's got the chip market wrapped up. He's like the biggest, whatever you could be in. And then the war hit. And rationing went in. And, so all of the supplies went, his workers went away, and all of these various things. And so he could have closed his doors and said, nah, just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
But now, and I figured, okay, this is the History Channel, so it's probably somewhat accurate. It might be, it's obviously a little fictionalized, but he picks up the phone and he calls the quartermaster for the Army. So the dude who kind of coordinates all the logistics.
Yeah.
And he said, I have this food that is lightweight. It's easy to ship. It lasts forever, right? Chips from the 40s are probably still around today.
They probably are.
And he said, and it has a higher calorie count than most other things you can get. And we all know that too. You eat one little bag and there's like 10 pounds that you've gained.
That's right.
And so he convinced the Army to buy Fritos and to ship them and put them in all the ration bags and all of those things. Because, he looked at that and he went, I could cry or.
Opportunity.
And he picked the or. And, how many times do we do that in business? It's like, well, pandemic hit. I can't go on. Lost my lease. Can't go on. Best employee quit. Can't go on.
Yeah.
And instead we need to be, going, okay, now what do we do?
Yeah. I just tripped. Okay. I got to get up. Right. And how do I keep moving? I love that story about the Fritos. I hadn't known that. So
well, and now the Lay's potato chip guy. So what he did was he got lobbyists to work with the U.S. Congress, and they actually declared chips as an essential food item. So they right. So they were no longer rationed. But yeah, I mean, we look at it and we laugh, obviously, because we're thinking, okay, they're chips.
Right.
But, it really, it's like, okay, and I can just see, this, the old, big fat male lobbyist going in and saying, we want chips.
Well, it's kind of like when they made ketchup a vegetable.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. But what it shows, and I think to your point, is they saw a problem. One handled it one way.
Right.
And saved his company. One handled it another way and saved his company. So they were ingenuity. They were just genius in how they looked at it and solved it. So
and then they collaborated. So because now we know the company is Frito-Lay, right?
Yeah, that's
but
right.
What happened was that Howard Lay went to the Frito guy, who was not named Frito, and he said, "You have this market wrapped up. I have this market wrapped up. I will make your chips and sell them in my market. You make my chips and sell them in your market." And it worked, and they could have just fought each other, and had a chip war. But instead they figured out, how can we collaborate? And, and I think that's important because, we talk about, collaborating, and we talk about, competition. Sometimes competition could be the best place you need to be working.
It is. And I always, when I'm training for an event, I always like to work with somebody that's a little bit better than me.
Right. Because they're going to push you.
They are going to push me. And there's some really good science that says that, if I were to run with somebody that was running 5 seconds faster than me, I'm going to run faster.
Right.
Because I'm going to try to keep up with them. So
but if they're a minute faster, you're like,
well, that's right. Right. Because it's like, oh, that I can't do that. So I love that competition. My wife and I, we started with our kids, we started a Iron Chef competition we do every couple of months, and we all cook a meal. And it's not really to see who was the best,
right?
But it was to all of us try to raise up our game in the kitchen a little bit more. And so I think competition can do that fairly well. Right. But as you said, if there's somebody else that's such a more superior cook, well, then it's not a competition, and there's no way I can win.
Yeah. And so then you don't try. But the key is to think, okay, I'm not at that level yet.
I love that word. Yeah. Yet.
Right.
So, and it's like, I can't do that yet.
Right.
But maybe if I do something today that will get me one step closer, then maybe I will. I was working with somebody, they wanted to start their own business. And I said, do something in the next 72 hours that moves you forward.
Right.
Find a business name, get a domain, just one thing that moves you forward a little bit, and then do another one. And then another one. It's that, that same, that song that you and I have heard so many times growing up as kids. It's like, put one foot in front of the other and soon you'll be walking out the door.
Right. Well, I saw something just today on Facebook, a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. You do not need to see the entire staircase to take the first step.
I love that.
Right? Isn't that cool? And I'm not really sure if he actually said that, but it was cool.
It was on Facebook, so chances are it was not accurate.
Right? Abraham Lincoln uses it. But yeah, I mean, we really do have to have goals. We have to dream. We have to embrace that nervous fear energy and go forward. And I mean, Bryan, this has been absolutely delightful. And see, this is why I set the timer, because we're almost at the end of the program. We've talked about your book. The link to it will be in the show notes. But, tell us more about, first of all, how do people find you? And then what are the services that you provide?
Yeah, well, I know this. I could talk with you for hours, but I don't know that your listeners.
This is why I set the timer.
Yeah, this is they probably wouldn't want to listen to us for hours. So a couple ways to get in touch with me. You can go on LinkedIn and look for Bryan Gillette, and it's Bryan. You can go to my website, which is epicperformances.com. So it's EPIC performances with an S.com, and then you can get connected up with me that way. The services I generally provide for companies is I do a lot of one-on-one coaching with leaders on how do they kind of step up their game, how do they lean into things they're really good at and get maybe a little bit better. You don't look at any professional athlete and you look at Usain Bolt, who's the fastest runner on earth.
Right.
He's not working on his pole vault.
No. He's focused.
Yeah, even though his pole vault's probably terrible, that's not where he needs to focus. He's trying to get a thousandth of a second off of his 100 meter.
Right.
And then work with teams on, all right, you're trying to figure out where you want to go over the next couple of years. And then how do you put that together? How do we put that plan together? How do we figure out how we're going to measure your success, and then who's going to do it? So that's a little bit about what I do and how you can get in touch with me.
I love it. I love it. Well, we just have scratched the surface on this. And so it just means that we have to have you on again. And I would be delighted to do that. So we'll have so much fun. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
I love that question. And I've often asked it. I think one of the things we didn't talk about is think about when you're 80 years old. And what regrets might you have of things you didn't do? There was a book that was written about and looked and talked to people that interviewed that were in their 80s and kind of their final part of life. And often what those people regretted is the things they didn't do versus the things they did do. And so whenever I'm faced with this big opportunity or I'm working with somebody that is, I'll ask them, it's like in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, will you regret not doing that? And if the answer is yes, then spend a little bit more time thinking about whether you should, because maybe you should.
Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. Well, I am Deb Creer. I've been having the most wonderful conversation with Bryan Gillette of Summiting Group. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.